The courtroom felt alive, as if every panel of dark wood and every pane of glass carried the weight of anticipation. A hushed crowd filled the gallery, their eyes locked on the two figures at the center of the storm. At one table, Congressman Jasmine Crockett straightened her blazer and set her jaw, her gaze sharp as a blade. Across from her, Vivek Ramaswamy sat with the practiced ease of someone who had lived many hours in the public eye, hands clasped lightly, as if nothing in the world could unsettle him. The murmurs died when the gavel fell. A silence so deep it seemed to press against the walls settled over the room. The air smelled faintly of polished oak and sweat, the kind that clings to people when history might be about to turn. Narration guided the scene as though from above. This was not a trial of crime, it was a trial of truth, whether words meant to dismantle wokeness would stand when measured against the weight of lived reality. Crockett rose, slow and deliberate. Her heels clicked against the marble floor as she moved toward the podium. She paused, scanning the faces in the gallery. Students, business leaders, reporters, their pens poised, parents, some with worry creased into their brows, everyone waiting for the clash that had been promised. Her voice, when it came, was steady but searing. "Mr. Ramaswamy," she began, "you've built a platform on the idea that wokeism is America's disease. You call it poison, a threat, the rot of our nation. But what you refuse to acknowledge is the very real damage such rhetoric inflicts on people who have been denied opportunity for generations." Vivek leaned forward, offering a faint smile that never reached his eyes. "Congresswoman, I believe in truth, I believe in merit, and I believe that identity politics, what you defend, tears us apart. That's not rhetoric, that's reality." The gallery shifted uneasily. Das turned. Whispers stirred like restless leaves. Jasmine's gaze sharpened. "Reality?" Her voice rose, not in volume but in force. "Reality is the single mother who works 2 jobs and still can't break into an industry that favors connections over competence. Reality is the black business owner denied loans by banks that look the other way. Reality is the student told their history is too inconvenient to teach. You want to talk about merit? Then we must talk about the barriers built before a race even begins." She pressed her hand lightly to the podium, steadying herself, the fire in her tone burning hotter with each syllable. The cameras flashed, capturing every flicker of her expression. The narration deepened. This was not opening argument. This was a declaration of war, a war not waged with weapons, but with words, evidence, and conviction. For the briefest moment, silence fell again. Then a ripple moved through the crowd, some nodding in agreement, others folding their arms in defiance. The lines had been drawn. Crockett's eyes didn't leave Ramaswamy's. "Facts matter," she said softly, almost like a vow. "But people matter more." And with that, the battle had begun. The hum of tension lingered in the air as the judge nodded for proceedings to continue. Reporters leaned forward in their seats, pencils scratching paper, recorders blinking red. Jasmine Crockett adjusted the microphone before her, the faint screech of feedback punctuating the moment. Her gaze held steady, unwavering, as if she could see through every layer of the argument she was about to unravel. The narration swept in. At the heart of the storm was a single question. Was the so-called anti-woke revolution an honest defense of free enterprise, or a veil that concealed the erosion of equity? She clicked a remote, and the projector screen behind her flickered to life. Headlines blazed across it. Vivek Ramaswamy, wokeness is a cancer on capitalism. Another, Ramaswamy declares DEI is a death knell for meritocracy. Clips rolled of his interviews, his voice calm but cutting. When businesses prioritize politics over profit, everybody loses. Jasmine let the images hang in the air before speaking again. "You frame inclusion as a burden," she said, her voice steady, each word honed like steel. "You call it poison to our economy. But the evidence, the actual data, tells a story you cannot erase." An economist was sworn in, a woman with silver hair pulled tight into a bun, her glasses reflecting the screen. She carried an air of gravity, the kind that only years of studied truth could provide. Jasmine guided her forward. "Professor," she began, "you've studied the performance of corporations that embrace diversity and equity initiatives. Tell this court what you've found." The woman's voice was calm, precise. Decades of research reveal a consistent pattern. Companies with diverse leadership are more profitable, more innovative, and more resilient to crises. McKinsey's most recent global study confirms this. Diverse executive teams outperform by more than 30% compared to their peers. The gallery stirred again. Some scribbled furiously in notebooks. Others exchanged glances. The data was not abstract. It was a revelation. Jasmine pressed further. And how does this square with Mr. Ramaswamy's assertion that DEI destroys meritocracy? The professor lifted her eyes, meeting the congresswoman's gaze. It's the opposite. Inclusion broadens the pool of talent. It ensures merit is not hidden under centuries of exclusion. Jasmine's tone sharpened. So when my colleague here claims these programs cripple our markets, the record shows he is wrong? The professor did not flinch. Factually wrong. Categorically wrong. Narration thundered in. Here, the facade began to crack. The claim that equity weakens capitalism dissolved under the weight of evidence, leaving bare the human cost of ignoring it. Vivek's composure did not break, though a flicker of impatience crossed his brow. He leaned toward his microphone. With all due respect, selective studies don't prove the whole. Correlation is not causation. Businesses thrive because of leadership, not because they bow to identity quotas. That's common sense. Jasmine's eyes narrowed. Quotas? No one is speaking of quotas. We are speaking of opportunity. We are speaking of talent long overlooked. What you dismiss as politics is simply fairness given form. She turned again to the gallery. On the screen now appeared photographs of workers, black men in hard hats, Latina women in lab coats, young graduates clutching diplomas. Their faces carried pride, but also struggle, carved into their expressions. These are not quotas, she said softly, though her voice carried the weight of the room. These are human beings, mothers, fathers, dreamers, who ask for nothing more than the chance to compete on equal ground. When you strip equity from the market, you are not defending merit, you are defending privilege. The narration drew close, intimate. In that moment, the debate ceased to be about spreadsheets or slogans. It became about the lives suspended between rhetoric and reality. A ripple of applause broke from one corner of the gallery, quickly hushed by the bailiff's stern glance. But the current had shifted. The room was no longer neutral ground. Jasmine closed her notes, her voice lowering into a steady resolve. The truth is simple. The world you claim to defend, one without accountability, without equity, is a world that cannot survive the century ahead, because progress will not be opt, and people will not be erased. Her words hung in the air like a verdict yet to be spoken. Vivek folded his hands, eyes locked forward, preparing his counter. The crowd leaned in, sensing that the deeper clash was only just beginning. The courtroom felt heavier now, as though every breath carried the dust of history. The judge gave a curt nod, allowing Jasmine Crockett to call her next witness. A woman in her 40s rose from the gallery, shoulders squared yet trembling faintly. She wore a simple blouse, sleeves rolled to the elbow, and clutched a folder against her chest as though it were armor. Narration moved softly across the silence. Behind every statistic is a story. Behind every debate, a life. Jasmine gestured toward the witness stand. Please state your name and tell us why you're here today. The woman cleared her throat. My name is Linda Torres. I own a small catering business in Dallas. I started it from my kitchen, with nothing but family recipes and borrowed pots. Her voice wavered, but she steadied it. When a local grant program prioritized minority-owned businesses, I applied. I thought maybe, finally, I had a chance. She opened the folder, showing documents to the court. I was denied. They said my application wasn't competitive. Later I learned larger companies, ones already backed by investors, took the lion's share. My staff, 2 employees, both single mothers. I wanted to grow, to hire more people like them, but the doors shut before we even knocked. Her words fell like stones into the silence. Vivek leaned forward, seizing the moment. And this, Congresswoman, is precisely my point. Equity programs create the illusion of fairness, but in practice, they reward bureaucracy. They pit entrepreneurs against each other, breeding resentment. His voice sharpened. Real competition doesn't need handouts. Jasmine turned toward him, her tone measured, almost surgical. "Mr. Ramaswamy, are you suggesting that systemic inequities magically disappear the moment someone files paperwork for a grant?" He smiled tightly. "I'm suggesting that hard work, not skin color, determines success." Jasmine's eyes narrowed. She let the silence stretch, then spoke with deliberate weight. "Tell that to the generations of redlined families denied mortgages. Tell that to women underpaid for equal work. Tell that to Linda Torres, whose hard work you dismiss because the system pretends it is neutral." The gallery stirred, some nodding, others bristling. The tension pulsed like electricity. Narration swept in, darker now. Two visions of America collided, one clinging to the purity of markets, the other insisting that markets, left unchecked, calcify inequality. Another witness was called, this time by the defense. A man in his 60s with a crisp suit and the air of certainty took the stand. He introduced himself as Charles Whitmore, a policy analyst from a libertarian think tank. His tone was polished, authoritative. "Diversity mandates," he said firmly, "impose costs that strangle small businesses. Every regulation, every compliance metric, it drains resources. You can't legislate fairness into markets. You can only create inefficiency." Vivek nodded approvingly, arms folded. "Exactly my argument." Jasmine did not flinch. She stepped closer, her voice like tempered steel. "Mr. Whitmore, are you aware that studies from Harvard Business Review show diverse companies outperform competitors by nearly 20%? Are you aware that turnover decreases when employees feel represented?" He shifted, only slightly. "Studies can be cherry-picked." "Then let's not cherry-pick," Jasmine snapped. She held up a packet of reports. "Let's look at the overwhelming consensus. Inclusivity strengthens resilience, innovation, and profitability. That is not inefficiency, it is survival." The judge raised an eyebrow, as if acknowledging the strike. Narration interwove with the hush. In that instant, the facade of academic detachment fractured. The testimony of lived experience clashed with the cold abstraction of ideology. Linda Torres sat in the gallery, eyes wet but burning with vindication. She wasn't a data point. She wasn't inefficiency. She was a human being fighting to keep her dream alive. Jasmine turned back to the courtroom, her voice lower now, intimate yet commanding. "Merit cannot exist where opportunity is strangled. Fairness is not the enemy of freedom. It is its foundation. Without it, capitalism is a mask worn by privilege." The words landed heavy, the silence after them louder than any applause. Reporters scribbled furiously, cameras clicked. Every face in the room reflected the weight of what had been said, some defiant, some awakened. Vivek remained motionless, but the faint tension in his jaw betrayed his composure. He leaned into the microphone. "Congresswoman, I won't apologize for defending a system that rewards excellence. Equity sounds noble, but in practice, it's discrimination by another name." Jasmine met his eyes, unflinching. "And ignoring inequity is injustice by another name." The judge's gavel tapped lightly, signaling a shift. The crowd leaned forward as Vivek Ramaswamy rose from his seat. He walked to the stand with the polished confidence of a man accustomed to stages larger than this courtroom. Television studios, campaign rallies, debates that reached millions. His suit was immaculate, his expression composed, but in the charged silence, even his breath seemed heavy. The narration framed the moment. Now the architect of the anti-woke crusade would defend his creation, not from a podium of applause, but under the scrutiny of truth. He adjusted the microphone, his voice smooth, deliberate. "I've said it many times, and I'll say it again. Wokeness divides us. It teaches Americans to see themselves not as citizens, but as tribes. It makes victims where there should be competitors, and it undermines the greatest system mankind has ever known, capitalism built on merit." The words landed with practiced rhythm. Heads in the gallery nodded, others frowned. He leaned back slightly, allowing the weight of his rhetoric to fill the room. Jasmine Crockett rose slowly, her eyes locked onto him with a gaze that could strip varnish from wood. "Mr. Ramaswamy," she said evenly, "you speak of unity, but unity built on denial is nothing more than silence. Silence for the oppressed, Silence for the excluded. Silence for those whose labor has long been exploited without recognition. Vivek smiled thinly. Congresswoman, unity cannot be built on guilt. My vision is not to silence anyone but to stop elevating identity above merit. That's the trap of your so-called equity. She stepped closer to the podium, her voice lowering into a sharper cadence. Merit. Tell me. Who defines it? Who measures it when systemic bias ensures some start the race miles ahead while others are chained at the starting line? A murmur rippled through the crowd. Some gasped softly, others exchanged pointed glances. Jasmine clicked another slide onto the projector. Charts appeared, wage gaps by race and gender, unemployment disparities, studies on systemic bias in hiring. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The facts spoke in neon clarity. Mr. Ramaswamy, you've said publicly that DEI initiatives kill productivity. But here is data, peer-reviewed, global, that proves the opposite. Companies that embrace inclusion increase innovation, reduce turnover, and expand their markets. So I ask you, who is dividing us? The policies that bring people in or the rhetoric that pushes them out? Vivek leaned in, a flicker of steel in his tone. I don't deny disparities exist, but forcing corporations to fix them with social engineering, that's tyranny disguised as progress. Jasmine's eyes blazed, her voice rising for the first time. Tyranny is watching entire communities locked out of opportunity while elites preach merit from towers they never had to climb. Tyranny is pretending neutrality exists in a system born from exclusion. What you call social engineering, I call justice catching up to history. The gallery erupted in murmurs, the bailiff stepping forward to quiet them. The air itself seemed to tremble under the weight of the clash. Vivek's composure tightened, his jaw flexing as though resisting the urge to retort too quickly. He inhaled, then spoke with quiet conviction. Congresswoman, you speak of history, I speak of the future, and in the future, we cannot afford to divide every success by race, every failure by oppression. We need excellence, not excuses. Jasmine stepped forward, her voice dropping into a tone both intimate and thunderous. And yet your future is built on a lie. That excellence exists untouched by context, that failure is always personal, never systemic. I don't call that the future, Mr. Ramaswamy. I call that the past, dressed in new clothes. The silence afterward was sharp enough to cut. Cameras flashed, reporters scribbled. In that pause, the courtroom felt suspended, caught between the pull of two worlds, one clinging to denial, the other demanding reckoning. The judge finally cleared his throat, breaking the silence. Proceed, he said simply. And with that, the battle raged on. The air in the chamber seemed to thicken, as though invisible walls were closing in on everyone seated there. The judge's gavel had long since fallen silent, but the echoes of Jasmine's fiery exchange with Vivek still lingered in the minds of the audience. Outside the courthouse, the rain had eased, leaving the world glazed with a damp sheen, yet inside, the storm had only just begun. Jasmine adjusted her blazer, her eyes burning with purpose. She rose again, deliberately slow, her chair scraping softly against the wooden floor. The sound, though subtle, drew every gaze back to her. There was an unmistakable intensity in her movements, the kind of precision that belongs not to someone uncertain, but to someone who has prepared for this moment her entire life. Mr. Ramaswamy, she said, her voice even now, calm but sharp as glass. You've built your persona on the claim that you are unshakable, a man immune to political correctness, but what you call strength is, in fact, willful blindness. Vivek smirked. He leaned back in his chair, projecting an aura of nonchalance. Or perhaps it's clarity. America has been drowning in identity politics for decades, Congresswoman. I simply refuse to play the game. Jasmine tilted her head slightly, her lips curling into the faintest shadow of a smile. You refuse to play the game because the game has never demanded a cost from you. You dismiss the experiences of millions as theater, but you've never been forced to live the script. A murmur rippled through the audience. Jasmine's tone wasn't angry now. It was surgical, each word cut clean, deliberate, undeniable. Vivek's jaw tightened. He shot back, his voice louder this time, almost theatrical. I was raised by immigrants who came here with nothing. They worked harder than anyone else in their community. Do not mistake me for some pampered elite. I understand hardship. Her eyes flickered with something like pity. Hardship is not universal currency, Vivek. What you faced in building a career, what your parents faced in starting over, is real. But it is not the same as being followed by security every time you enter a store, or being pulled over simply because of your skin tone, or having your very name used as a weapon to suggest you don't belong. Do not confuse struggle with oppression. The silence that followed was electric. Even the clicking of pens had ceased. A young man in the gallery shifted forward, his face tight with emotion. Jasmine's words weren't just for Vivek anymore. They were for every person in the room who had swallowed silence for survival. Vivek tried to laugh, but the sound landed hollow. So, what then? We keep rehashing history? We keep dividing people into tribes until there's nothing left of America but fragments? Jasmine stepped closer, her heels striking the wood like the ticking of a clock. No. What we do is acknowledge the fracture so it can heal. Pretending it isn't there does not unite us. It weakens us. She paused, allowing the words to sink deep. Then, with a measured breath, she leaned forward just enough that her presence felt inescapable. What you call anti-woke is nothing more than an excuse to shut down uncomfortable truths. You say you want unity, but unity cannot be built on denial. It must be built on justice. Gasps fluttered across the courtroom. Even the judge sat forward slightly, his hand resting near the gavel, though he did not raise it. Vivek opened his mouth, but for a moment no words came. His composure, so carefully crafted, so public-facing, cracked ever so slightly. And in that fracture, Jasmine's power surged. The gavel struck, echoing through the chamber like a thunderclap. The room hushed. Every eye turned toward Jasmine Crockett, who rose slowly, her palms pressed flat against the polished wood of the defense table. Her breath was steady, but her eyes burned with a kind of fire that no amount of pressure could extinguish. "You want me silent," she said, her voice low but sharp enough to slice through the silence. "You want me buried under procedures, drowned in objections, and cornered by men who have spent their careers bending truth until it no longer resembles reality. But I'm not here to bend. I'm here to break the cycle." A ripple of murmurs swept the crowd. The DJ opposite her, Trump leaned back, his smirk curling into something colder, more dismissive, as though her words were little more than background noise. He raised a hand, waving her off. "This is nothing but theater," he scoffed, his voice carrying just enough to stir laughter among his allies. "She's grandstanding. That's what she does best." Jasmine turned sharply toward him, her expression unflinching. "Theater?" Her voice rose, layered with contempt and conviction. "The only performance here is yours. You've spent years convincing the world that truth is a weapon to be buried, that accountability is something reserved for others, never for you. But today, right here, in front of this court, you'll learn that the curtain always falls, even on the loudest performers." The judge's gavel struck again, urging order, but the energy in the room was alive, thick, electric. Spectators leaned forward in their seats, sensing that what was unfolding was no longer just testimony, but a reckoning. Trump leaned forward now, his smirk faltering. "You think you can challenge me?" His words carried a venomous edge. "You're just a blogger, a nobody, a loud mouth dressed up as a congresswoman." The chamber gasped. Even the judge's brow furrowed. Jasmine froze for a moment, not because the words cut her, but because she recognized them for what they were, a desperate strike, the kind of insult meant to undermine her very identity. She tilted her head, a slow smile creeping across her face, one that wasn't born of humor, but of certainty. "A blogger?" she repeated softly, her tone dripping with disdain. She stepped closer, her voice gaining force with each word. "If exposing corruption, if standing for justice, if tearing down the lies you've built your empire on makes me a blogger, then I'll wear that title proudly. Because while you hide behind wealth, behind bluster, behind every excuse in the book, my words reach people, my words expose you, and no amount of sneering will erase that." The silence that followed was broken not by the judge, not by Trump, but by the audience. Applause, hesitant at first, then swelling, rolling like a storm through the chamber. The gavel came down hard, but the energy refused to die. Jasmine stood taller, shoulders squared, her gaze locked on Trump. For the first time his eyes wavered, just a flicker, but enough to betray the truth. He had not expected her strength to rise from the insult he thought would crush her. And in that moment, the court understood. This was no longer a trial in the traditional sense. This was a battle of presence, of resolve, of who could command the truth when the weight of history bore down on them. Jasmine's voice, steady now, cut through the noise. You tried to reduce me, but what you don't understand is that every word you use against me only makes me stronger. Because I don't stand alone. I stand with the people who are tired of being silenced, and we are louder than you will ever be. The gavel struck again, but even its authority seemed powerless against the tide Jasmine had unleashed. Jasmine leaned forward, her voice low but sharp enough to cut through the hush of the chamber. You built your empire on the backs of working people, and now you sit here pretending to be the victim. Her words carried a sting that rippled through the courtroom, and the audience leaned closer, captivated by the raw confrontation. Trump smirked, tapping the table as though waiting for his turn to pounce. Spare me the speech. You're nothing more than a grandstander. You talk big, but when it comes down to action, all you do is point fingers. His tone was dismissive, but the heat in his eyes betrayed unease. Jasmine didn't blink. Action? You want action? How about the countless families bankrupted by your failed ventures, the workers who never saw a dime of what you owed, the small businesses you crushed, but while lining your own pockets? That's not leadership. That's exploitation. The judge raised a hand, his expression stern, but the tension was already crackling in the air. Reporters scribbled furiously, cameras clicking to capture every flicker of emotion on the faces of the two adversaries. Trump leaned back, forcing a laugh that echoed hollowly. You think the people care about some sob story? They care about results, and I delivered more than any of you ever could. His words drew scattered murmurs, but no applause. The crowd wasn't convinced, and Jasmine saw the shift. She pressed on, her voice firm, deliberate, every word sharpened to pierce the armor of arrogance before her. The people care about truth. They care about integrity. And what they're seeing right now is a man terrified of accountability. A ripple of agreement moved through the audience, some even nodding in open support. Trump's smile faltered, replaced by a twitch of irritation he couldn't fully hide. He pointed toward her, his finger jabbing the air. You don't know me. You don't know what it takes to lead this country. You're just another politician trying to make a name for yourself. Jasmine let the silence stretch for a moment, her eyes never leaving his. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet but carried more weight than any shout. I don't need to make a name for myself. My name is already written in the fight for justice, and history will remember you, not as a leader, but as a cautionary tale. The chamber erupted with gasps, the tension boiling over into a storm of whispers, the words reverberating in every corner of the courtroom. The judge's gavel struck, demanding order, but the moment had already been sealed. Trump shifted uncomfortably, muttering under his breath, but the damage was done. The balance of the room had tilted, and Jasmine knew she had drawn blood, not with rage, but with truth. The energy in the courtroom was no longer his to control. It belonged to her. The chamber was restless, a low murmur rolling across the benches as though the air itself carried the weight of the coming storm. Jasmine sat rigid, hands folded before her, her gaze never leaving Vivek. He leaned back in his chair with a sly half-smile, the posture of a man who thought the crowd already belonged to him. Cameras clicked in the corners. Every eye seemed to shift between them, predator and challenger caught in a tightening circle. The moderator cleared his throat, trying to wrestle the room back under order, but his voice cracked against the anticipation. Vivek leaned forward at last, his tone sharp, his words dripping with condescension. Congresswoman Crockett, you've made a career painting yourself as the voice of the people. But when I look at your record, I see nothing but obstruction. I see noise. Tell me, what have you truly done, besides complain about injustice and stir division? A murmur of approval rippled from one side of the gallery, his supporters emboldened by the direct strike. Jasmine didn't flinch. Her eyes narrowed. Her fingers drummed once against the table. She allowed the silence to grow thick, unbearable, until the weight of it pressed even on Vivek's smirk. She rose slowly, her chair scraping against the polished floor, and the chamber hushed. Her voice carried a quiet fire, restrained but lethal. You want to talk about noise? You want to measure impact by decibels instead of by lives changed? Let's measure. While you stood on podiums calling everything woke as though empathy were a disease, I was in communities where people had lost hope. I was listening when mothers begged me to fight for health care that might save their children. I was there when families evicted from their homes wondered if anyone in this government still saw them as human. Her voice cracked once, not with weakness, but with raw, living memory. The silence deepened, heavy, almost reverent. She let it linger before pressing forward, sharper now. And while you brand every call for justice as division, tell me, Vivek, what is more divisive than dismissing the pain of millions as a punchline for your campaign? The room erupted. Applause surged like a wave, shouts echoing against the chamber walls. The moderator pounded his gavel, but the noise only swelled, the force of it impossible to contain. Vivek sat frozen, his smirk faltering, his jaw tightening as though each clap hammered his position further into doubt. Jasmine didn't smile, didn't soak in the adulation. She stood firm, unblinking, her hand pressed against the table like an oath made solid. Her final words cut through the uproar, quiet yet devastating. You dismiss justice as noise because justice unsettles the comfortable. But know this, Vivek, sometimes noise is the sound of a people waking up. The crowd rose to its feet, the thunder of their response drowning everything else. Vivek's eyes darted across the room, calculating, searching for footing he could not find. For the first time, the man who had seemed untouchable looked small, eclipsed by a voice that refused to be silenced. The gavel slammed again, desperate for control. But the chamber no longer belonged to rules. It belonged to the roar of truth, and in that roar, Jasmine stood unshaken. The courtroom felt like a storm about to break. Everyone could sense it. The press leaned forward with pens poised, lawyers whispered among themselves, and even the judge tightened his grip on the gavel as if bracing for impact. Vivek stood tall, his tone sharp, every word calculated to provoke. He pointed toward Jasmine, his eyes flashing. This is the problem with Congress today. Performers who shout louder than they legislate. People who prefer Twitter applause to real policy. A few smirks broke out from his supporters in the gallery, their whispers like sparks feeding a fire. But Jasmine remained perfectly still. She didn't blink, didn't flinch. She slowly placed her pen down, folded her hands and stared.